who's my guest, and his name is Dacre Stoker, who is a descendant of the great Dracula writer Bram Stoker. And what is really significant about this particular cast is the fact that tomorrow would have been Bram Stoker's birthday. He would have been 174 years old. And next year, in 2022, would have been 125th anniversary of his novel Dracula from when it was first published. So Dacre, it's an absolute honor to have you on here. And I'm really excited about this. And
Bobby, thank you. Yeah, it's a great honor. And especially since, we're talking, about Bram Stoker's legacy, and tomorrow is his birthday. It's incredible what he's done and how he's changed the world of horror. And also it's cool when you think this book's been around for a while. It will be 125 years old, May 26th. 2022 was published by Archibald Constable in London, May 26th, 1897. What an incredible legacy.
It's unbelievable. I mean, although it was published so many years ago, I mean, I've read the book, but I've saw the films as well. And even from then, when it was first published, I mean, it leaves a mark on you. It leaves the character, and I just love the Dracula character. And I just think it's a fantastic story,
Well, I've got to give credit, and I always do when I chat about this. First of all, when Bram's novel came out, the scholars have noticed that it was met with mixed reviews, which is a little bit inaccurate, because a good friend of mine, Dr. John Browning, has been able to access all kinds of finally now digitized newspaper clippings from around the world. And yeah, there was a few, like two or three negative reviews, Bobby. And that's really because Dracula was so horrifying. It was, so sensational at the time. Plus the fact that Bram made it feel so real. He placed it in real time. It was set in 1893, even though it was published in 1897, but real places based on real people. It was horrifying. But what John found was that there was an incredible amount of positive press. So even though they were not 100% positive, there was about 98% positive, that people recognized the genius of his writing, the epistolary style, the suspenseful style brought on by this epistolary style. You didn't actually see the character Dracula. He was off in the shadows. He was only on about 20% of the pages. And so he's deeper than just, and not taking away anything from the amazing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but that monster is front and center. You see him being created, he marches around, like this, unstoppable force. Whereas Dracula lurks in the shadows. He's in the minds of the other band of heroes. Yeah. So you don't see him because of a narrator. He appears later on in the thoughts and the desires of the writers. And my gosh, he has been adapted onto stage. And that's why I say you're an actor, Bobby. You probably recognize that. If it wasn't for Bela Lugosi and all the stage adaptations, the novel probably would have just, hummed along in the bookstores only. But the fact that it went on stage, the Hamilton Dean, John Balderston production went just world, over to America. And then, of course, even though Nosferatu was a knockoff and was a copyright infringement, once the movies got a hold of it in 31, Lugosi again in the Todd Browning adaptation, that just propelled the story. And it keeps on going, doesn't it, with all these different adaptations into popular culture.
Yeah, I find it quite intriguing as well, because obviously I've watched the Bela Lugosi version of Dracula. When I first saw that really scared me. I think it was just how it was done. I thought it was more kind of like a mysterious character, more mysterious than the say likes of. I love Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's fantastic as well, but Bela Lugosi kind of, to me, epitomized the character. And, just like you said, it was more of a mysterious character who was kind of, I'd say kind of in your conscience, but more like in the shadows.
Yeah, you're right. The only thing, and I have to go on record saying this, that it was a big change, the physical appearance of Bram's Dracula to the dashing, suave, aristocratic Bela Lugosi. And look, you and I know it very well. because as an actor, especially in those days, if you're a stage actor, you've got to be attractive, physically attractive, so people come to the performance. They're not, they would be repulsed if they saw an actor the way Bram Stoker described him, because Bram described his guy as almost, animalistic, horrible breath. His eyebrows, kind of big bushy eyebrows, came together, his long aquiline nose, pointed ears, all dressed in black, this gray hair. Special effects nowadays, and of course, in '92, the Coppola version had incredible amount of great costume changes. But back in the day, I totally get it why they morphed the Dracula character into the Lugosi style. The tux and the metal, and that just stayed throughout many years. And now, hopefully, with the 125th coming on. And I'm trying to get the world to sort of look at Bram's original Dracula the way he created him, and look at him a little bit different, but not taking anything away from Lugosi, because boy, without him, book sales would have been way down, and we wouldn't have been where we are today.
Yeah, and it's funny because obviously when we saw Coppola's version of Dracula, obviously the character's based on Vlad the Impaler. And obviously back then, imagine
that was a change.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Imagine back then, back in the 1920s when they made, was it the 20s that they made Bela Lugosi's
1931 was the movie, and Bela was on stage in 1924 onwards.
Yeah. So could you imagine back then if they actually made him like with the long hair, with a big beard, a big moustache and stuff like that, I wonder what the audience's reaction would have been.
I think they would have been, and the term because you've acted on stage, right?
Oh yeah.
And how do you guys call it when people get up and the chair and the seats, the seat pops up? What is that horrible noise that you guys refer to when something's wrong and people stand up and walk out?
That's what I'm saying. It's just, it's like you get different reactions from like each night when you're actually on the stage, and it's like, the closest I've kind of done to anything such as Dracula, I played one of the body snatchers, Burke from Burke and Hare.
Okay.
Who were really like, there were two Irish navvies that came to Edinburgh to work as body snatchers, but they actually worked. There's a big canal in Edinburgh which is called the Rathel Canal, which is like the Union Canal it's called, and Burke and Hare were the two of many thousands of Irishmen which man-made that big canal. And what they did was they later actually invested in getting like a guest house, and obviously there had people coming in. They were earning money from that. But then they got to know the doctor of the Edinburgh University. His name was Dr. Robert Knox, and what he was like he was an anatomist. He was like cutting up bodies and stuff. He was like, obviously back then Edinburgh was one of the leading places in the world for biology and medicine.
Absolutely. It was a forerunner. I've been to the museum there. It's incredible. It really is.
I love going to that museum. But what they actually did was Robert Knox, he was kind of complaining because the bodies, the cadavers he was getting were kind of more or less half rotten. And he said he wanted to get fresher bodies. So the two, like Burke and Hare, what they said was, we'll sneak into the graveyard, and the bodies which have been buried, we'll just, as soon as they're buried at night time, we'll take them back out, and you could use them, but we'll have to get money for it. So they did that for a while, and then they said, well, guys, they're still not so good. The bodies, he says, but if you get fresher ones, he says, I'll pay even more money. So the guest house that they actually had people coming into the guest house, and when they were staying there, what they actually did was two of them actually went into the rooms of the guests and actually suffocated the guests.
Sure, very fresh bodies.
And then they gave them to Robert Knox, and then they got more money from it. And then eventually, I don't know, they killed so many people, and then they got caught, and then they got hung, and Edinburgh's Grass Market, and you know, but that was them. But yeah, I played William Burke, who was an Irishman. So I'll tell you,
but you're touching on something. You're touching on something, Bobby, that really is interesting. And I'll just bring a parallel to Dracula again, because so many roads lead to Dracula. Bram Stoker had three brothers who were very famous doctors. My great grandfather being one of them. He actually George Stoker invented ozone therapy, and he was actually in a Irish medical military unit on loan to the Turkish during the Turco-Russian War. He was also sent down to South Africa during the Zulu Wars. And that's where a lot of, I hate to say it, but modern medicine is learned on the battlefield. All these kind of MASH units figuring out advanced hospital, how to save people. But Bram had two other brothers, and one of them was the head of the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland, Thornley Stoker, who was so famous. He was knighted Sir Thornley Stoker for all of his very advanced medical experiments and processes. He did all kinds of experiments, and one of them was featured in Dracula. He actually helped his brother as the medical advisor for writing Dracula. And I saw proof of that when I analyzed the Dracula typescript. I saw Thornley's handwriting crossing out things and said, no, we wouldn't use that here. Obviously the blood transfusions, there was no blood typing back in the day, but there were blood transfusions, and Thornley did those. He helped Bram do that. And also the brain trephination, the surgery that Van Helsing and Seward did on Renfield in chapter 21. When Renfield got beat up by Dracula, he had a brain hemorrhage, so he's starting to die. And with great tension, Bram has his brother help him, cut the hole in the head of the conscious Renfield while he's talking to them, and they're trying to get the swelling down so he could give them information about where Dracula is and who he is. So the family, I am sure, Bobby, that much like the character you played in that movie, there was an awful lot of grave pinching, body snatching going on at the Royal College of Surgeons. And I'm sure Thornley Stoker benefited from that. And it certainly helped Bram write Dracula. So it's so cool, all these different things that go into the novel. And I just got to say, I mean, having gone to that museum in Dublin, and I remember specifically the operating theater with that kind of a plastic cadaver, and it shows how the surgeries were done back in the day. That just really is interesting to me to think what they were doing at the time. And again, that comes back to Dracula with what kind of surgeries, what kind of medicine was at the time. Why were people so bloody scared, of the supernatural, of spiritualism? What was happening at the time makes a story all the more relevant, doesn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. And what's really funny was, I mean, when you touched upon Thornley Stoker, I was wondering, did he actually, when Bram was actually writing the novel, obviously, did they give him some notes on things like illnesses and stuff, and what would happen if they had a particular disease, for instance? I mean, did he actually advise them?
That's the great question, and we sort of put that in the category of Bram's creative process and what was going on in his mind to arrive at the vampire coming from the grave and taking blood from the living, and what would you do? There is a little known quote by a guy called Fred Ansley, who is an author, that claims he and Bram were walking through London. Of course, Bram moved to London in 1879, where he started working for Henry Irving in the Lyceum Theatre. That was Bram's, as we say, the day job, but it was also a day and a night job for 27 years. His writing was all on the side. But apparently, Ansley says that Bram and he were walking through London late at night, sort of after a theater. And I don't know, it sounded a little bit like the way Ansley wrote it, that they'd had a few pints and we're sort of joking and laughing. And as you know, you get creative. And I do when I've had a glass or two of wine or something. And that's when some of the creative juices flow a little more. And if you're with your mate walking around, Bram said, well, I had a thought. And he said, what's that? He said, what would happen if a vampire went into a doctor's office and he had galloping consumption, which, as we know, is tuberculosis?
Mm-hmm.
What patient-doctor confidentiality would exist? So Bram is thinking his legal mind and also the medical side. If a vampire goes into a medical office and has consumption, would the doctor have to ask him, oh, well, who are some of your, they do, like today we call it contact tracing. He would have to ask, have some of your victims, did you catch it from a victim or did you give it to a victim? So it's sort of Bram's way of sort of just exploring the idea of, oh, how contagious is this? What would be the medical ethics involved? So I try to find little nuggets like that, Bobby. It's like a piece of a puzzle, and put it together by thinking, where did Bram get the idea? Who did he talk to? Mm-hmm. We know, luckily we've seen 125 pages of his notes that live in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. So we've seen structure, thoughts. We've actually seen a day timer that Bram plotted out the story. That's why he had all the days, the times correct. The train routes were all correct. But what we didn't see is just things like that, where he actually got specific ideas. I'll tell you one thing, though. He got ideas of the specific vampire traits from a Scottish lady, Emily Gerard, who was a writer, I believe, introduced to Bram two sources. One, a book that Lady Jane Wilde, Oscar Wilde's mother, wrote that mentioned the similarity between Transylvanian superstition in Mrs. Gerard's book and the ones in Ireland's folklore. And I think Bram was teased as a young boy on Irish folklore. I think his mother told him those stories. But Lady Jane Wilde was a lady who encouraged Bram in his writing. So that was a big part of it. And then we also know, because 2 years ago in the London Library, Philip Spedding, who was working there at the time, noticed all 26 books that Bram used for his research, because they were listed at the back of his Dracula notes in Philadelphia. All those 26 books were still there in general circulation, and some of them had notes in the margins. One of those books was Land Beyond the Forest by Emily Gerard. Wow. And when you cross reference this, there's a chapter called Transylvanian Superstitions. Bram lifted about 30 of these things into his notes. And then of those 30, about 10 of those went into Dracula. For instance, the name Nosferatu, Strigoi, how you kill a vampire by cutting its head off. There was one that was shooting a pistol into the coffin. That wasn't used, but he found that. There was the garlic that would stick in the mouth. Bram used that one. So he got a very realistic feeling that he could convey to his readers because of a Scottish lady, that she was equally as fascinated. She married a Polish guy who was in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and she was based in Transylvania herself when she wrote the story. So what a small world.
It is a small world, and it's funny just over the years, especially. I mean, not just because of like what's happened towards the book and stuff, but just like there's just around the world, there's just a lot of Irish and there's a lot of Scottish influence, especially like say the pioneers that went to America and Canada, that were like Scottish and Irish. We've kind of made our mark, haven't we?
Well, you certainly have. I mean, what I understand was Halloween in Ireland, and I'm not sure about Scotland. You could tell us how similar, but Halloween, the All Hallows Eve, the Samhain festival, when the night, the night gets longer, and the veil between the living and the dead, that's the night. Well, that was brought over to North America, and of course they used to have the jack-o'-lanterns made out of turnips to scare off the devil. Well, they didn't have turnips like they did in America. They had, jack-o'-lanterns were made of the pumpkins. So a lot of those very interesting superstitions and myths, spread like all the people did that had to escape these countries either because of illness, or they just wanted more opportunity, or they were interested in expanding their livelihood and looking for fortune. We're thankful for all these interesting things that have come America's way because of Scotland and Ireland and England and so on.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. But but going back to like what you're saying about like in Cruden Bay and Slains Castle, which was a big influence, especially an interior of Castle Dracula. And, like I said, I mean, I actually saw pictures of like, the actual chamber and the actual ruin up in Slains Castle. And it just, you try and picture about how it would have been on its day. It would have been kind of eerie and, to walk through and, to actually think people were actually living in that place, it's quite scary.
Yeah. It's an interesting history. I'll give you some insight into that. There's a fellow, his name is Mike Shepard, and he is a retired oil patch geologist. And he has, like I got, the bug to figure out more about Bram Stoker and Dracula. And he read a couple of the biographies, and there's like 5 of them out there. And of course, I don't fault them, but all of them none of them have up-to-date information. They had enough information at the time that was available, and they wrote their biography on it. But what Mike has done, and a lot of it's because of digitization of libraries, as more money comes into libraries, universities, newspapers get digitized, and you can access them easily because of your computer and Google. And he wrote a book called When Brave Men Shudder. I wrote the introduction to it, and I met him during the process of writing all that. It was about 5 years ago. But it showed that Bram Stoker actually came to Cruden Bay, Scotland, a couple of years after he had his incredible holiday in Whitby, where he discovered the town and chose to place the novel there. But he took copious notes in Whitby. But it was a couple of years later, 1893, when he made his first visit to Cruden Bay, and he kept coming back for 11 to 12 more summers. So Bram found his writer's retreat. And as you can imagine, being an actor, Bram has to get away from the Lyceum Theater because it's such a busy time, but he needs to be in close enough contact for Henry Irving because he's obsessive compulsive and wants to stay in touch with his friend and manager. So Cruden Bay had a telegraph office connected to the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel, which is still there to this day, and it's a wonderful place to stay. So Bram found his place. He contacted his son and wife and said, "Come on up, I found the place." And Bobby, this place must have spoken to him, because he would walk on the 2 Mile beach. He would get into his creative space. And Mike and I believe that this theory is true. Again, it's a little piece of that puzzle. Henry Irving was a method actor, and this was quite early on, back in the late 1800s when method acting was in its infancy. But this is what Irving did. So he was an imposing figure on and off the stage. And I believe Bram took some of that. And as Mike and I chat about it, when he's having to get into his headspace to write the novel, and his wife actually was quoted in the newspaper saying, "We were quite scared of Bram when he was writing Dracula, because we think he was marching up and down the beach. He would have seen from the beach this incredible, imposing Slains Castle, while it was still functional, not as a ruin as it is today, but high up on the cliffs with the waves rushing up against it. It can be a very dark and foreboding place."
Yeah.
So this method acting that he sort of borrowed from Irving helped him get into the place to write the story. And although Mike and I have no record of him actually being invited by the Earl of Errol, Mr. Hay, to go into the castle, we are convinced that he did, because as you said, Bobby, and you've seen it on the telly, that the layout of Slains Castle, and now we can see it so plainly because, of course, the roof is off, everything's been stripped out, but the walls are still the same. It looks exactly the same from a drone when you look down, and you can actually see almost word for word the way Bram described Jonathan Harker arriving in chapter 2, met by Count Dracula, goes through a door into a hall, goes to another door, and walks into this octagonal room lit by a single lamp with no windows to the outside. This is exactly as this castle is described. What Bram did, and what he did with many things, was he took those elements of Slains Castle in Cruden Bay and moved them to northeastern Transylvania, to an area where he needed to have his castle. And there was no castle. The next castle he actually used was Bran Castle, which was described, or he described it by looking at two sketches in some of his books, once again in the London Library, and he moved that 400 miles to the north. So he merged these different castles, put them in a different location for just the right atmosphere that he wanted. So absolutely, I mean, the Scottish influences in this story run very strong indeed.
Fantastic. And originally, I mean, obviously, he used Whitby for when the boat comes over from
Varna. Yeah.
But you know what was funny? Originally, it was going to be Dover, wasn't it?
That's right. That was in, again, because of those notes in the Rosenbach, we saw in Bram's early planning, Dover was the landing spot for the Count. But once again, Bram gets his summer holidays off from the Lyceum, and he went off to Whitby a week by himself, which, as you know, the writer in him would come out. He marched around the streets, and we see in his Dracula notes that he has written about 25 pages specifically on Whitby, and he got lots of stories from the adventurers of the day, the sailors, the Coast Guard men, the rocket crew, anybody who he felt could help him enhance his storytelling. He would talk to them. And one particular Coast Guard man, Mr. William Pethernick, actually gave Bram a page from the Coast Guard logbook. And that page detailed, just as you said, the Dimitri that came from Varna. Bram turned that into the Demeter, and that ship came through an incredible storm, like a supernatural storm, that bared a lot of resemblance to the same storm that the Dimitri landed and actually came in under full sail into Whitby Harbor and wrecked on the shore. Bram actually saw a picture of this wreck in the newspaper and described his fictional landing of the Count after that. So he was quite well known for taking bits of pieces of real life things. Mm-hmm. Whitby features in chapters 6, 7, and 8, the 199 Steps, St. Mary's Church, Royal Crescent, the train station, all these places where Bram went. You can go there today. As a matter of fact, I've been there many times, and I see people with their copy of Dracula taking little selfies next to all these spots. Just like people go to New Zealand for, Lord of the Rings, or Rome for the Da Vinci Code, they go to Whitby for Dracula, selfies. Yeah.
But it's funny as well because, I mean, obviously it wasn't even that long ago. I mean, but over a month ago, I went down to York, and York's a beautiful city. And I was going to do a little tour around Yorkshire. I went to Harrogate, which was nice. Went to York, and I was actually going to go to Whitby as well because it looks beautiful. Especially with the cathedral on the top of it's like I wouldn't say a cliff, but it's like high up. It's like an old ruin.
It is a cliff. They call it East Cliff. East Cliff is the side with St. Mary's Church and Whitby Abbey, and West Cliff is the side where Bram actually stayed in. So you're right, it's a huge cliff.
Yeah, but from where we were in York, we're actually going to go to Whitby, but I don't know. It's just the train times and the train situation. You had to get two or three trains just for a short distance. It would have taken something like an hour and 50, maybe nearly 2 hours to get to this part. It would have I think we had to go around different parts of Yorkshire to actually get to Whitby itself. But I really, really want to go to Whitby. And I remember Pauline Part saying to me, get yourself down there. It's a beautiful city, a beautiful little place.
Well, listen, you're right, which is interesting on a couple of things. You've got to go, and I'll be glad to come over and be your host to show you the hot spots. But it is really funny about the train station. And, Bram, back in Bram's day, If you didn't take the train, you were on the road with a carriage or, barely some sort of motorized vehicle that would ever get there. So he did take a long time to get there, but he featured the train schedules because, of course, not only is Bram coming there to write the novel, but in the novel, Bram had to figure out how to get the Count's 50 boxes of dirt off the ship and with a broker onto the train and get into London. And of course, once you're in London, there's all the different train stations, but they had to get can't remember if they were going to Paddington Station or what station, but they had to get these 50 boxes of dirt to the 3 different locations in London so the Count could have his place once he starts converting his victims, his vampires, to sleep in their native soil. This is yet one more of these traits that he got from Emily Gerard's Transylvanian Superstitions. So logistics play a big role in the novel. And where did Bram get that? He was responsible for the logistics of traveling with the whole Lyceum Theatre troupe, not just the actors, but the set designers, the sets, not all over the UK, but he actually brought them to America, Bobby, 8 times. Ships. 8 times. And I have seen this map, one of the maps that Bram drew on. He got an existing map and he calculated with these lines where the trains were going to go between the cities. There was like 20 different cities that they would hit for about 2 or 3 nights, and how long it would take to go on different routes, because he was responsible for all the trucks at the other side to get the things out. So Bram used his organizational skills as a theater manager and a touring manager for writing of the novel to make all the movements of the Count and his boxes of dirt and the characters when they had to go back the Orient Express across Europe to go and try to catch the Count, the ships at the end of the novel to go back to chase the Count. This was a natural thing for Bram, but that's what made the story so bloody realistic, was the truth involved in all the traveling and moving of people.
That's unbelievable. Just to think, about that now, you'd have to go through a lot of, I wouldn't say hassle, but a lot of organization and stuff to do that now. Back then, that must have been a nightmare.
It was. And again, it's funny the way Bram used that skill in writing. He had the Count at one time ask, and I think Bobby Jonathan Harker was about 75% Bram Stoker. Bram was called to the bar himself. That means asked to be a lawyer, take an exam, you could be a lawyer. And he turned them down and said, no, thank you, I'm going to stick with my job as a theater. But when the Count asked Jonathan Harker, how many lawyers do I need to conduct my business in London? Obviously the Count couldn't tell him, I'm bringing 50 boxes of dirt over there for my victims, because the Count couldn't tip his hat and explain what his strategy was. But he was going through the basic understanding of how to conduct business with different banks and brokers to move these boxes of dirt. So it's very Bram-esque to work out and to lay out these logistics in the story, as I said, just like he did in real life.
And going back to Bram, what's really funny is, going through some of his life, especially his early life. He might have died when he was young. He had an illness.
Well, it was very lucky that this little boy survived, because, as we mentioned, his birthday being tomorrow. Imagine this: you're 1847 was known as Black 47. This was disease, illness, theft, everything that you could imagine going on in Dublin because of the potato famine and cholera epidemics would bring people in like the Walking Dead into town to try to get some kind of food, beg, borrow, or steal food. And so it was not a great scene, Black 47, but imagine a little boy born sickly himself, mysterious, undiagnosed illness. We don't really know what it was. Of course, I used that to my advantage when I was writing Dracul, the prequel to Dracula. I took a leap and said, well, first of all, I do know, I have a very good good thought that he was bloodlet by one of his uncles, who was a famous bloodletting doctor. But what I did was I said, well, maybe there was the supernatural intervention. That's what the author does, to think, what if he was actually saved by this horrible illness by the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get back to reality, though. So he was bloodlet, I'm sure, and he did recover after 7 years. And then he went on to Trinity College, where he grew to be a big, strong champion athlete. So whatever it was, Bobby,
mm-hmm.
supernatural or natural, bloodletting or whatever, he did recover to become a very big, strong, robust 6'2"
mm-hmm.
man who excelled in sport. He excelled in the Philosophical Society, Historical Society. He got a master's in mathematics, and he was well on his way, but he was kind of stuck in Dublin until he wrote a theatrical review of Henry Irving, and that caused Bram to get a sort of an evening interview with Irving in the Shelburne Hotel. As we say, the rest is history. He got offered the job to move to London to be a theater manager, and that's what kind of got Bram out of Dublin and allowed him to have his dream job, a theatrical manager where he could write on the side. And all these little things, that childhood illness, where he was bloodlet, I am convinced, Bobby, it's part of what I say, the perfect storm of Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
That Bram, if in fact this is true, was bloodlet. There are 2 references in the novel Dracula to bloodletting. Harker actually described looking at the Count in the coffin when Harker first discovered him in the daytime in his coffin, bloated like a leech after a full meal. And I'm convinced that was firsthand knowledge that Bram had. Imagine as a little boy, 2 or 3 years old, having these leeches put on you to suck out the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one was in this treatise that I read by one of his uncles, that after they took out enough blood for you to pass out, they rehydrated you with oil and claret, which is red wine.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about physiology, you were dehydrated at this point. You're now going to be drunk in a drunken stupor for a couple of days. And I kind of think that led to Bram's writing of the women in white, the 3 brides, draining Jonathan Harker of his blood in the castle and being in this kind of nightmarish drunken state and too weak to mount an escape. So again, this is part of his illness, his recovery. Does even that plays a role in the novel Dracula?
And it's like, I mean, a lot of the things which you mentioned in the novel, it's like, as you said, is based on things which have happened to Bram. It's like, obviously when he was a boy, and it's like when he was ill, and but you often wonder what would happen, like if he didn't make it. I mean, there'd be no Dracula.
I know. Wouldn't that be? I mean, how sad would that be? I mean, somebody may have come up with something, because Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu wrote Carmilla, and J. Malcolm Reiner wrote Varney the Vampire, and John Polidori had written The Vampire at that stage. Maybe somebody would have got similar creative juices, but it probably wouldn't be the same. I will tell you something funny, though. I do take people over to Romania on tours to go see the real places where Vlad Dracula did his thing, reigned for 7.5 years and fought off the invading Ottoman Empire, impaled people, and so on. And then we show them the places where Bram said his story. Very few times, and I do see this though, people come to me, "Oh, you're the relative of that guy Stoker who has changed our famous leader, who is now turned into a Hollywood icon. How dare you do that?" And I said, well, in reality now, hold on. Bram did take his name from 2 books in the London Library and 1 in the Whitby Library, but he didn't actually take his full reputation. That was the movies. And it wasn't just Jim Hart and the 92 Coppola, but Jack Palance and the 2 writers, McNally and Florescu, pointed a connection between Vlad the Impaler. So not to say Bram doesn't deserve some of the, let's call it blame for connecting the real person, just like Bram did with real places, Vlad the Impaler to his Dracula. But there's no question that the 92 Coppola really did connect. And that's where Jim Hart made up a really cool story of Vlad the Impaler's wife, who committed suicide because she didn't want to be captured, and Vlad then rebelled against the church, stabbed the cross, and drank the blood and became a vampire. And then the story Luke Evans played in the movie Dracula Untold, which was a whole movie on Vlad Dracula's conversion to a vampire. So, as I said, Bram was creative. He used information that he had at his time. And I love taking people over to Romania, but we don't get all the credit for turning their Vlad into Count Dracula.
Because it's quite ironic, especially when you see Coppola's version of Dracula, and you see at the start, before it all happens, he's actually fighting for the church. And then in the end, he's obviously, we know that Vlad doesn't like crosses. He's like totally against it, you know. But no, that's what I was going to ask you, Dacre. It's like, when you go to Romania, I mean, do you get a mixed response from the people? Obviously, they're proud. You get some that are maybe proud of Vlad's history. Obviously, it was very barbaric. The man was a bit of a cruel man, obviously, when he was a leader and stuff like that. But do you get like a mixed response? You get some people that say, like your descendants he's been absolutely delighted about what they've done with our leader, or do you get some that are saying, we're offended because what you've did, what he's did?
It's a good question. And I'd say about 90% of the time people think, oh, this is cool. Here's a descendant of the fellow that wrote the story that has made our country the destination of vampire fans all over the world. And I say, there's a lot more to it. And actually, I was invited to a tourist conference over there where they asked me, what can we do better to harness the Dracula tourism? I said, I think what you need to do is, and I just off the seat of my pants, Bobby, I came up with this term, responsible vampire tourism. And it was just literally spur of the moment. And I said, look, if you tell the story of Vlad the Impaler and his exploits, you're right, he was an atrocious leader. He did all these barbaric things, but it was normal in those days to do those horrible things. And that's what you had to do with an army of 40,000 against the invading Ottomans of 400,000. He basically, for 7.5 years, held back this incredible force with the help of the Carpathian Mountains and the teeny passes from slaughtering Christian Europe. So he was a hero for that, and say, you need to celebrate that. But you also need to look at this book that has, turned into over 700 movies and stage plays and everything else, and celebrate that connection and show where that connection was made. Look at the two books by William Wilkinson and James Samuelson. I've actually had good discussions with the people that manage Bran Castle. And I say, you're like the nexus point, this castle. The description of your castle is actually moved 400 miles to the north to this extinct volcano, but you should talk about that here. You're the best place to do it, and say your castle was used for the description of this, but your castle was also on the border between Wallachia and Transylvania, where Vlad was the ruler. And was he there? Was he not there? Who knows? But tell the story and tell the truth of two streams of tourism and where they actually intersect. And that way you could double your tourism. And they thought that was brilliant. And so I get a lot of credit for that. And I do lead tours over there, Bobby. And I do want to also say in this show, which is really exciting, with the 125th anniversary of Dracula coming up next year, I'm putting together a series of tours for fans and scholars alike to come with me. One tour will actually go to Romania with this company called Experience Transylvania. They've got a website. You can go see their website, Experience Transylvania. They've done tours for years, and now they're going to tours where I'm leading them to all these places associated with both Vlad and Count Dracula. But I'm also taking people to coincide with the May 26th, 125th anniversary to Cruden Bay, Scotland, to see where Bram wrote the book, and also Whitby, as you had just mentioned, where he was so inspired that he put chapters 6, 7, and 8 there. So next year is going to be a cool year to go and experience, see some of these places. I've got experienced tour guides to be with us along the way, tell us some things that I don't know, although I know an awful lot, but I also defer to local experts when we get there and really get the vibe and feel the atmosphere of Bram Stoker's research and writing of this iconic novel.
Absolutely. And, to me, it was one of these novels which blew me away when I was really, I must have been a teenager when I read that. I was at school, actually. I think I was about maybe 15 when I got to reading the actual novel. And one of the things which really shuddered me was when, once I read it, I told one of my friends and they said that, Dracula was a real person. I'm like, yeah, right. It was based on a real person. Yeah. And back then, obviously, we never had Google or anything, but, I actually got to know more of, actually waited until the Francis Ford Coppola film came out before actually knowing how to look up the real Vlad in Romania. And, obviously some of the things he did were really cruel, but, he was a hero to a lot of the people there, obviously against the Ottomans, was it
But the Ottomans, here's the geography. You've got the Black Sea, and you've got the Ottoman Empire was not just Turkey at the time, but it actually extended to Ukraine and also parts of Bulgaria. And then you've got the Black Sea, and then you've got this sort of marshland, which kind of like if you're in America, it's like the Florida Everglades, but freshwater stuff. And then you've got the Carpathian Mountains. And then after that, you move over into Hungary, which was a mighty power at the time. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire was and they were bent on protecting, obviously, Rome and the rest of Christianity. So this is sort of the worlds colliding, and they collided right here in little old, what was Transylvania, Wallachia, and Moldavia. We know as Romania now. It wasn't known as Romania the day, but it was the battleground, so to speak. And because it had this, these mountains are beautiful. They're like the Swiss Alps, but they also have very teeny little mountain passes. And that's why Vlad the Impaler, and also, different rulers from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire that were, allies with Vlad at times would come in here and use those mountains as their big sort of Game of Thrones massive wall to hold back. The Ottomans, like 400,000 soldiers, and they also had gunpowder, they had cannons, but they couldn't utilize those because of going through the marshlands of the Danube Delta, as they call it, and they couldn't move them very well through the mountains.
And it's funny that you mentioned, so obviously the marshlands, but when they're going through the mountains, I often think about, when they go through, when they go around the mountains, it's like very, very thin roads on their horse and carts. And when you see the guy looking out the window and it's just a steep drop. No way.
I know it. And the movies, the Dracula movies over the years have depicted that very well. You mentioned at the top of the show that the 31 Todd Browning film with Bela Lugosi. Even back in the day, they, however they drew this or made little models, they really made you feel in those narrow trails along the mountains in those carriages that, one wrong step, and you're going out. And they've done that so well in all these different movies. The Coppola movie had that same feeling, Dracula Untold. But let me ask you this. I'm going to turn the tables just a little bit on you for a moment. Because you're a film guy, and as I said, there's been over 700 Dracula mentions of Dracula in different movies. So there's lots of vampire movies, not just Dracula ones. I'm going to tell you the first one I saw, and then I'm going to ask you the first one you saw, what you think of some of which ones. So as you mentioned, you were off at school. I was off in Canada. I was at a boarding school, and at the age of 13 or 14, I saw the Roman Polanski film, The Fearless Vampire Hunters.
You know what?
And I was ribbed mercilessly by my classmates when they saw, based on the novel by Bram Stoker, which it really wasn't, but the vampire was. Oh man, they just gave me a rough time. So did you see that movie? What did you think?
Did I see that movie? I actually bought that movie about a month ago on DVD. That is mental. I've just got it there. I've got it just there. But Roman Polanski, and just lots of. There's a few well-known English actors in it, like Alfie Bass is in it. Is it Alfie Bass? Yeah, and
Alfie, yeah, and then Sharon Tate.
Sharon Tate was in it as well,
who was obviously murdered by Charles Manson. So that's one of the times you want to see Sharon Tate. Yeah.
Just, it's funny you should say that. I could just picture as the old man being stuck in the window, and Roman Polanski has to go out and try and pull him back. And, and especially the bit where, who was in the bath again? Was it the girl that was in the bath? And she sees the guy in the top of the window looking down.
I can't remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's a window like it's above their bath and it's snowing outside. And he
gets rid of the to rub away the snow. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly.
What are some of your, if you have to give me like maybe your next favorite top 3 or 4 other vampire movies over the years, what have you liked? And I'll tell you mine.
Right. Well, the ones that stick out, I mean, it's not just actual films itself, it's actual scenes in the film which stick out. It's like if I see a particular scene, it's maybe not, I'll maybe think that's a great scene, but maybe it's not from my favorite vampire film. It's like the scene where, have you ever saw what's his name? The Frank Langella Dracula.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you see the bit where the boat was coming into Whitby? I found that terrifying. The bit where he changes into the wolf and he's like, he just causes carnage on the boat before it actually comes in. That to me terrified the bejesus out of me. Absolutely. But like, again, it was good, but I don't know. I like Coppola's Dracula. I like Gary Oldman. I think he's brilliant, but he's just a fantastic actor anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, I love obviously Lugosi, but I think maybe in my subconscious, especially when I was a kid, was probably Christopher Lee. But I think obviously it's not just his acting as Dracula. I think what was the music, the Hammer music, which terrified you as well, which it was like, it brought out that moment, and it was just this scary music. And also when he walks into the person, like the women's room, it's just, and he
had such a presence, didn't he? That tall, and there was something about him. It's hard to describe his presence, but it's interesting. The 1958 Hammer film with Christopher Lee was the first Dracula where you could actually see fangs, or allowed to see fangs and blood on the mouth. That's because the censors were pretty tough on those. And to me, that made it horrifying because, obviously we know what was going on with the other Draculas before that, but when you see the fangs and the blood, that's like, okay, that sets it to another game, doesn't it? Another level.
And what's funny is, I mean, talking about Christopher Lee, I just about appeared in a film with Christopher Lee so many years ago. I actually had a part with him in the Greyfriars Bobby film. But what actually happened was something happened, it got cancelled, and they recasted my part, but he was still in it. And I was gutted, absolutely gutted. It was just maybe one line I had in it.
Imagine that if you could have said in your career, you got to perform with Sir Christopher Lee, as iconic as he's been in all film, that would have been amazing. Honestly,
Dacre, I was so excited when I got told at the time. I was young. I was younger at the time, obviously, but I was so excited about it. But I couldn't remember what happened. I don't know if it wasn't like a strike or anything, but something caused actual production to cancel, and I was supposed to be in it, and they recasted the part, and I was gutted. Maybe they just thought, well, maybe we'll cast someone else for this part, but I was absolutely gutted about it. But what I was gutted about was obviously not working with Christopher Lee, which would have been great. But the man was an absolute legend, and especially I've read up on him as well, and he's absolutely fantastic. He was a great man. Clever man as well.
I think Bram Stoker would have been really proud. Well, first of all, proud with the whole legacy of what he's created. I mean, as a stage manager, you think of a long run. You look at recently, things like Cats and Les Miserables have had incredible runs on stage. But when you think of 125 years of Dracula and all the many different stage adaptation, film adaptation, costumes, toys, spin-offs, unbelievable. And Christopher Lee, I think, would have been up there with one of his more favorite. He's more like Bram's original Dracula than Lugosi was, and taking nothing away from Lugosi, he had to do what he did with the look he had. But I think he would have liked Lee. So let me hit you with these. I'm gonna go down my little list that I jotted down while you were chatting of and again, it's no particular order, but vampire movies that made a big impact on me. And I don't watch them all. I just don't have time with my writing. But Salem's Lot by Stephen King, both the book and the movie. Wow. That got me as a Montrealer. I used to go to Maine for holidays, and I read that on one of my holidays in Maine, and I thought, oh my God, this is like so real. And then I read a quote by Stephen King that said, I believe that if Bram Stoker was to bring his Count Dracula to America, he'd come to a small town in Maine, and that's why I wrote the story the way I did. And that was impactful.
You know what? When you think about Salem's Lot, you just think about that little boy at the window, knocking on the window, getting in. Oh, to me, that was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. But that was a great film.
Here's another. And it's interesting how it came this way, but Steve Niles did a graphic novel that was adapted into a movie called 30 Days of Night. And this was where vampires were set in Alaska. And again, I'm an avid fly fisherman. I used to be a fishing guide. I've been to Alaska, and even in the summertime, you have almost 30 days of complete light, but in the wintertime, it's 30 days of complete darkness. I thought, what brilliant way to have vampires walking around, all day long without worrying about the light. But I don't know if you know this, but I'll share this with your listeners. It wasn't Bram Stoker that created the fact that vampires would burn up or die when they were exposed to light. Bram Stoker's vampire traits had the vampire lose their total power during daylight. So they were, back to like what a normal person could do. It was the copyright infringement film Nosferatu, F.W. Murnau, that created the death of the vampire when exposed to light. So it's sort of interesting when you look back at where these traits came from and how they were used in ensuing films. But that brings me to the film Nosferatu, who, even though it was a copyright infringement, that movie was bloody scary. I don't know how you feel about that. That was really scary.
It's been a while since I've saw it, but yeah, I found it very scary, especially when he's creeping up the stairs and goes into the room. Just see the fingers and the door.
That's right. Oh yeah. How about this one? If your listeners want to know what I think, and I share this with many people, the most faithful adaptation of a Dracula movie based on Bram's book is the 1977 BBC miniseries with Louis Jourdan. That is most like the book. They still make a couple of changes. They merge characters and a little bit here and there. But if you want to see something that's close to the book, that's what you look at.
You know what's really funny, because I could actually vaguely remember that BBC series, and that really kind of scared me a bit as well, and he always has to be where, even when someone nicks themselves, I remember the man who played Jonathan Harker, and he cuts himself shaving, and he's always behind him, and he's like, but Louis Jourdan, is he still alive?
No, he passed away a few years ago.
Because and he just had that.
You're right. He's in the shadows, and it's a very dark movie. They use shadows and darkness very well in that one. And then, we've just talked about the 92 Coppola, which I think was obviously they had the advantage of incredible costumes. They won 3 Academy Awards, but it's probably about 70% faithful to the novel. They obviously, Jim Hart, who's a friend of mine, the screenwriter, who created the love story element of it, which I think was brilliant. But it's close to the novel, but not exactly. I like that. And then here's a complete one out of left field that has nothing to do with Count Dracula, but it's the Swedish film from 2008, Let the Right One In.
Yep, I've seen that one as well. And that was quite good as well. It's the little girl, isn't it? Who's a
Yes.
vampire?
And it's, again, on my exploits as a coach in the sport of modern pentathlon, I've been to northern Sweden for competing and training, and it has that feel of darkness, desolation, and here you've got this innocent little girl who is not so bloody innocent. So if your listeners are interested in a non-Dracula but really good quality dark movie this time of the year, let the right one in. So that sort of wraps up my films that really get my interest. Are there any others that you have that you want to mention?
Well, I mean, obviously I was brought up with the Hammer ones, obviously like the Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing collaborations, and I love Peter Cushing as Van Helsing.
Oh yeah.
He was just such a fantastic actor who, when I was a kid, he used to terrify me as well. But from obviously when you hear people on the TV about working with, it's amazing because it's the actors which scare you in real life. They're just like really nice people, lovely people. And apparently Peter Cushing was such a lovely, elegant man when he was alive, and just so kind. And, but, it's obviously the characters, especially when he played Frankenstein, it goes in your subconscious, when you watch a particular film, and, when he's chopping up and so on, like when he's making the monster and stuff. But, when actors do that to you, when they make an impression like that to you, that's when you know that they're great actors, but obviously a great story.
Sticks with you.
Absolutely. But obviously going back to yourself, Dacre, I mean, you've actually got a new book out just now, haven't you?
Well, yeah. Let's try to wind this down with a little explanation of my writing.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a natural writer. I was actually a trained in school teacher and a physical educator.
Yeah.
I actually taught school for 25 years, both science and physical education. And then I was an athletics coach. I coached the sport of modern pentathlon.
And you also,
Canada.
you were a tennis coach, and you actually, was it the person you were coaching that won the tournament? Was it like court tennis that won a tournament?
Court tennis. It's known as court tennis, as well as real tennis in England. And the young man that I've been coaching now for 8 years, Camden Revere, is actually the world number one.
That's fantastic.
And he's been world champion. So that still to this day keeps me very busy. But I write now in my part-time, and all the information, Bobby, that we've been talking about, the research that I've done for 12 years, finding the Dracula notes, the Dracula typescript, the one interview he ever wrote, reading all the biographies. Bram Stoker's got great grandsons. One of them I actually found the Bram Stoker's lost journal in their attic, and I had that published just recently. So I've done a lot of research so I can understand my famous relative, but I use this information with co-authors who are stronger writers than I am to help me write damn good books. And so I started with a continuation of Dracula 25 years after the story of Dracula ends. I wrote Dracula the Undead, a sequel with Ian Holt. And that story has become an international bestseller. It picks up the action 25 years after Dracula ends, and the band of heroes go back to Transylvania with the baby born near the end of the novel. So young Quincy Harker is named after Quincy Morris, who dies, and he wants to find out what's going on in the family's history, and they're keeping the dark side history. And then I did even more research, and I found, just as I've mentioned in your show, Bram Stoker to be so interesting, and this whole concept of what happens if he was healed by the supernatural. And along with J.D. Barker, I turned that into yet another international bestseller called Dracul, a prequel to Dracula, telling the story of Bram's life, leading up to him needing to write the novel Dracula with firsthand knowledge that the vampire was real. And so those have been sort of my big bookends. But in the meantime, I published Bram's Lost Journal, and then a couple of stories have come out. Slane's Castle Secret History with Mike Shepard that I talked about is delves into the real history of Slane's Castle and how Bram used some of that in his novel. And we've also got Dracula's Bedlam, which is hot off the press within the last few days, actually, with Chris McCauley and John Peel, who is a Doctor Who writer, We've continued the story of what went on in the insane asylum run by Dr. Jonathan Seward. So what Chris McCauley and I have done is looked at lots of different pieces of the novel Dracula that didn't get fleshed out or were edited out for some reason because of length, or got kind of stuck in Bram's notes, didn't go any further. And I now have a list of what I think are interesting things. And the first one was other stuff that goes on in the asylum that is linked to R.M. Renfield, how he became insane, what happened to him. Maybe he didn't die after all on the operating table. So those are things that I do, constantly looking for, doing my writing coupled with good co-authors to continue Bram's legacy in the way that he would approve, using his notes, using things edited out of the typescript. So that's my gig. And you can find all about me on bramstokerestate.com or dacrestoker.com. Tells us all about my writing.
Absolutely. So if Bram was still with us, if Bram was still with us today, if he saw the legacy which he created, would you reckon he'd be thinking, or would you reckon he'd be really proud?
I do. I think it's a sign. I mean, look, you're an artist as well. If somebody was to copy your style but change it a little bit, if you didn't like it, but you realized they were making an honest effort, and it wasn't, if it wasn't horribly an insult to your work, I think you would be happy that, oh, I've inspired people. I think Bram, being a theater guy, would have done the same. He died before the story went on stage and any film was made. And I think if he's sitting up there somewhere, if his spirit is floating around somewhere, and he could look down and go, my God, 125 years later, over 700 films, thousands of comic books, story adaptations, stage adaptations, little kids at Halloween, all these different things. I think he'd go there and he'd go, you know what? I made an impact. And I made an impact based on my research, my creativity, and my life. And I think he'd be really proud. I'm very proud of him because I'm trying to live his legacy. So people will remember the creator, not just his creation.
You know what? Just from his, you've touched on the two things there, on the creator and the creation. And it's just over those nearly 125 years, it's just a remarkable achievement what he's did. And it's hit the world, and it's, I mean, if you go around the world, I mean, if you go to the Arctic, or if you go anywhere in the world, if you ask that anyone if they know who Dracula, they'll know who it was, and they'll know who wrote it. It's just incredible.
Well, I agree with you. It's funny you say that, because I've been in many places, and if you get a taxi driver, an Uber driver, somebody goes, I'm a relative of the guy who Dracula. Oh, Dracula. And they go, who wrote it? So my job is not done, Bobby. I'm still trying to help people understand who wrote it. And that's going to be my legacy, is trying to keep Bram's legacy alive. Enough people know who Dracula was. But now let's look at the interesting man. And on his birthday being tomorrow, let's try to celebrate his life. And of course, we could have 5 more shows, Bobby, on all the other books he wrote, the 11 other novels, the short stories. But for now, let's learn Dracula through Bram's eyes, and then later on, let's learn more about Bram Stoker, because he was a very interesting guy.
Absolutely. And tomorrow, I mean, I'll be, obviously, unfortunately, I've got something like a funeral on tomorrow. But I'll be raising that.
That's appropriate.
I know.
That's appropriate.
But what I'll be doing is I'll be raising a glass to him tomorrow. I'll be raising a glass of brandy to him tomorrow. And, it's just, even over the next 175 years, they're still going to know who he is. It's just a great man who wrote great novel. He's got a great novel which has kind of touched everyone's subconscious, and just a fantastic character, and it's, obviously I'm proud to actually speak to you about him because, you know, ever since I was a kid, he's terrified. His creations terrified me, and obviously now as an adult, and obviously I've saw different adaptations of film. I've obviously read the book when I was younger, and it's just honestly, it's so great to have you on here, Dacre. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to have you on here. And tomorrow I will be celebrating, like is it your great grand uncle?
Great grand uncle, yes.
Great grand
listen,
uncle.
I got to say, I thank you. It's people like you that do these podcasts, that are actors, other writers, people that think of this in this way to help keep Bran's legacy alive. And I thank you for doing it. I thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely, and it's to do this, especially on the day before your great grand uncle's birthday. It's such an honor, especially talking to you on here. Great guy as well. And listen, just thanks so much to come on here. And I'm absolutely chuffed that you're here to tell me everything about, like, obviously your uncle, great grand uncle, and obviously about the Dracula novels and stuff. It's been absolutely, honestly, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Dacre. And
my pleasure.
And and all the best with the tours next year. And I'll maybe just pop along to see what it's all about.
Might have to meet. I tell you, I hold that. I will if you can get to Whitby someday when I'm there. Let's go take a look, and we'll have a pint somewhere. But I'll show you Duke of York Pub at the bottom of the 199 steps. We're gonna have to have a pint, and we'll talk more. We'll continue this more.
That sounds good enough for me, Dacre. Honestly, thank you so much for appearing on my show.
Take care.
And all the best to you, my man. Okay?
Same to you. Best of luck with all your acting as well. Take care, man. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.